Hey everybody, so today we are tearing apart a GTX 1080. We just posted the review of this, obviously. I'm sure most of you have seen it by now. So we're going to take this apart. This is a $700 project that cannot go wrong. And as such, I've taken a couple precautions here for anti-static discharge. So we've got an ESD safe mat. This is a proper mat that's got the mesh inside of it to dissipate any voltage that comes off me or current that comes off me. So to keep the static electricity off the card, I'm going to be wearing one of these ESD bracelets that goes into the wall. It's connected to ground, and then anything coming out of my arm in terms of electricity will sink into this mat and just dissipate through the mesh. So we've got that covered. I'm going to take this apart and keep very close track of everything. So this is actually from a 980 Ti, which I took this apart previously. You can see right here. This is a 980 Ti. And it was pretty successful. Came apart easily. The process looks like it has not changed just from glancing at the 1080. We have not practiced this, so this is a dry run here, and hopefully everything works out pretty well. So the GTX 1080, just basic specs that are important to note are that it is, first of all, a 2560 GP104 CUDA core card, and it's brand new, $700 for the Founders Edition. This is the Founders Edition, different from the AIB version from the board partners. And the board partners will be shipping as low as $600 within MSRP anyway. And then, of course, we'll see pretty high numbers, probably all the way up to like $750 or something for a hybrid card, which we are actually going to create. And that is a large reason for this project. So we're going to create our own hybrid GTX 1080. And this is just the start. This is the teardown. The next video will be the build up and the testing for the hybrid version of the card. So let's start by taking this thing apart and marking where all the screws go. So we're gonna start by removing the plates on the card. It's got a couple of brackets here. There's this weird shaped bracket on the top. That doesn't really serve, as far as I'm aware, any real mechanical purpose, but it does need to come off. I think it locks into the sort of mounting bracket underneath, and that's about it. So we're going to take that off using a, what is this, a number 3, I think, Allen key. Might be a 2.5, but it looks like a 3 to me. So we're going to do that. Next, we'll move on to the one on the underside. There's an identical version of this on the underside, which I'll show you. Okay, so we got the screws out for this, and this will actually pull out. I think it's got an adhesive on there, so you will have difficulty getting it back on later if you want to get it back on the exact same way. That comes off, and then here's that one on the bottom that I was talking about. It's the same exact thing. And what we're going to do, just to keep everything clean, is mark on the magnetic project mat over here where the pieces go. So I'm just going to draw that shape so I remember later that these screws go there. So I'll put these two there. And unscrew the bottom one as well. I can walk over there and do it, I guess. All right, so I'm gonna stop for a second because it was hard to get some of those screws out, and I don't wanna dig at them with this crappy, terrible tool. You should use better tools than I am, by the way. So what we're gonna do is magnetize it, and this is just a giant magnet from a motor, from a printer motor. And you could use a hard drive magnet as well. All you have to do is get the tool you wanna magnetize, put it in there. Do that for a second, and should be magnetized after that. So pretty cool trick if you did not know it. Now obviously you don't want to put something as powerful as this motor magnet near a hard drive or any kind of permanent media because it will destroy it. So we've got those off, and I'm just going to mark this on our sheet as well. So there's our 2 screws for the bottom plate, 2 screws for the top plate, and those were just the easy ones to cherry pick. Let's figure out the best approach to taking this thing apart, because I have not taken one of these apart yet. Obviously it's brand new. So these, I can tell you right now, these 4 go to the pump block, or well, it's not a pump because it's not a liquid card, but rather the cold plate, the alloy heatsink right here that you can see through the acrylic. That alloy heatsink is mounted by these 4 Phillips head screws. And then the rest, there's a bunch of really tiny screws. I think I have a tool that can do that. That holds on the back plate. And this back plate is sort of like the 980 one, which I happen to have over here off to the side. This 980 back plate up here, there's one screw spot. You can see this stands out a bit more than the rest of the back plate. That's because that comes off to give more breathability for SLI. I don't think it really did a lot for the 980. But for the 1080, they decided to change it for this entire half of the back plate, so you can just take that whole thing off. I don't think, it does not look like we'll have to remove that to do what I want to do later, which is install a liquid pump. So that looks like it can stay there. So let's go ahead and just start where it's the most obvious with these. It looks like number 4, that's a 5, number 4 Allen screws, something like that. Yes, that is what it is. This one's actually very loose. I'm curious if someone else came in here first. So yeah, this is a 4, or is it a 5? That's some kind of millimeter Allen key. I'm gonna put that there. Go diagonal opposing corners for every screw from now on. This is what just a rule I have, because if you hit something that is under some torque, particularly anything like a heatsink for a CPU or a GPU, you will want to go opposing corners. And that is just to make sure that the torque spreads out evenly over the device as you're removing it or installing it and does not cause any damage. So we can do those up there, that's right there, something like that. So we've gotten the 4 screws off for the main part of the shroud. That's the sort of left side of the shroud. This part looks like it's a separate piece of plastic, which, as you'll see in this box I've got, is actually true for the 980 Ti as well. So this is our 980 Ti. This is the 980 Ti. If you've ever wanted to see a box of a $650 video card, these are the parts left over from one of them. So this is the old heatsink for the 980 Ti. And one thing I really want to do is play with this heatsink on the 1080 if it fits and see if their new one actually has any real changes, because they've said that it actually performs much better. So I want to validate that statement. That's the acrylic plate. This is the shroud for the 980 Ti, and that was the left side of it, and I can actually just do this for you. And then that's the right side of it, and it mounts together like that with these sort of feet that socket together. And then you've got this part of it as well for the front. That mounts in there. So you've got these 2 screws that hold this down, these 2 screws that hold these pieces together right here. These 2 screws mount into, it looks like, not the heatsink, but it mounts to something in there. And then there are a couple of screws on the underside as well. And this, if you look at these 2, it's basically the exact same thing. They've just tessellated, or they stopped the render process when they were generating the shroud. So same mounting points, though. It all looks very similar to me. So we're going to put that away and follow the procedure used for the 980 Ti, which is next going to be to remove the small screw that's right here on the underside of the card. So this is starting to get loose now. I can feel it beginning to give, but it's not released quite yet. We need to undo the one at the top here. It's the same size Allen screw, and then we will be pretty close to pulling this thing completely apart, at least for the shroud. So you can see my magnetic project mat over here is beginning to get pretty filled in with the plate. You'll definitely want to copy that if you do this project yourself, because that will help you significantly in reassembling it if something goes wrong. You also want to really make sure you're not stripping any screws, which is very easily done with these right here. I'm not sure if these they're magnetic, so I'm not sure what kind of screw it is, but it's a very soft metal for these smaller head screws. So you want to be really careful about not stripping those. And our next part of the process, you can see this plate is now, the acrylic is now loose. So the only thing holding it in there is the force from the 2 pieces of the shroud holding it down, which I guess answers our earlier question, is these screws hold the plate down. So that's all those do. Let's remove these 2, because I know these 2 socket into the main part of the shroud on the left, as we saw with the 980 Ti. Once we get these 2 out and the next 2 out, I think it'll pull apart, but I'm not positive. I think it's all though. So the card is obviously still held together somehow. I've been pulling on this a little bit, and there's obviously a screw in there somewhere. Normally the rear I/O area does actually have a screw that's important, and there's a couple of them. Some of them need to be removed and some don't need to be removed, because we don't actually have to take this part of the expansion slot out. It's just not important for our purposes. So I am going to reference the 980 Ti box again, box of cannibalized parts from the 980 Ti, And just before you call the PETA equivalent for hardware, this is actually still a functioning card. So let's see what we've got here. This looks like, are all these screws in? So all the screws for the 980 Ti, it looks like I left in, or I reinserted for the hybrid block once we installed that. And I'm not seeing an obvious reason to remove any of these just from first glance. Actually, I can see some separation back here. Oh, there it goes. Okay, cool. So we're actually good to go on the 1080. You can see that starting to pull apart. So we're just gonna unsocket that. So that's the satisfying unsocketing of the 1080 that you can get. Let's get this 980 parts out of here again. And just for sake of comparison, so they said they changed their heatsink. Let's take a look at that and see if they did. I'm gonna clean this off a little bit before I put on the anti-static mat. So here's the old heatsink. There's the new one. Looks like there are actually some changes to it. So there's some cosmetic changes, and it looks like there are some performance changes, but we'll know when we look further into it. Now, I've already done the thermal benchmarks on this as part of the review, so we know how it performs, and it is it's on the chart somewhere. You'll see a chart in the review, but they're pretty close to each other, a degree or two, I think. So we've got a bunch of small screws in here that are holding things down. We'll have to be careful about those. Let's get the rest of this shroud apart. How is this held on? Looks like this is still being held on somewhere. So I'm gonna look for that. So I think what I've decided is that these tiny screws are probably holding things together, and I do remember taking a bunch of screws like this out of the 980 Ti previously, so they do have to come out at some point to get all the way down to the GPU. Very small screws though, do not misplace these. I'm gonna stick them all up in the top corner of my mat and just make a note that these go into the underside of the shroud. Let's just say this block is for shroud underside. Just so I know where those go. Take this one out. I'm doing opposing corners again, as much as possible anyway. There are 4 screws holding this part of the card together. I'm gonna flip this over now and start preparing to remove the actual heatsink itself, which is secured by these 4 large screws. So this is where it's, wow, that's very loose. That's kind of curious. Those aren't bad. Those are all factory tight. This one was pretty loose, but we're gonna take this apart. It is a spring-loaded set of screws. Do opposing corners because that's applying tension to the PCB, and it's pretty low force, but it's just better to be safe and not apply any undue force at odd angles to a $700 video card. So we've got all of those out. I think I just felt that heatsink fall out of the card. Yes, it is beginning to fall apart. There it goes. So there is the new heatsink. You can see the thermal compound is on there, of course, still. It's pretty fresh as it is a brand new card. Pushed out to the sides a bit. And then in terms of heatsink design, are these actually reasonably different? I'm gonna clean this off. So if you wanna do this yourself, you can just get any kind of paper towel and rubbing alcohol and rub that off. I actually didn't use any rubbing alcohol. Looks like it's pretty new still. So there's the new heatsink versus the old. The old one is the one right here. So that's the old heatsink for the 980 Ti, not the 980, though I think the 980 is pretty similar. Here is a 980 that's assembled for reference, and it looks like there's a couple cosmetic changes here. I don't know if that really impacts performance or not. Its thermal is pretty sensitive, so it's certainly possible that an extra channel like that would impact performance, but it does look mostly cosmetic, to be honest. Looks like the rest of it's all pretty similar design. I know there's vapor chambers set up in this thing somewhere, but we might have to start drilling stuff apart and cutting holes to find that. So to explain this sort of nomenclature a bit, NVIDIA, obviously the company, Taiwan, where it was fabbed, and then it looks like that might be a specific model number or something, but the GPU itself is GP104, and it's the subversion -400. A1 is the rev, so that is the revision number. So A in the hardware industry is used universally as meaning it's a consumer-ready product, as opposed to an X-rev. If you saw X1, what X1 or X2 or X0 means is that it's sort of a lab sample. So X is a lab sample. It's not really consumer-ready, and it's something that's being tested internally. This is A1, so obviously it's ready to go. It's a full version of the card. It was not some internal version that we were sampled. This is actually the retail product. But we're ready to take the rest of the shroud off now. So this thing came loose as I took off the heatsink. So the heatsink was what was keeping this down. We can pull that off now. And that is the container. This is actually a good bit different. That is the container for the blower fan. The previous container is right here. So they are got similarities where it matters. They've got this enclosure here, but this feels like a metal enclosure to keep the airflow going where NVIDIA wanted it to go, which is basically contain it within the card. And then this heatsink off to the far right side over here is the VRM heatsink. I think the voltage regulator module lives under there. So let's go ahead and finish this teardown process. The VRM's under here. I want to see what that looks like. I want to see what the GDDR5X memory looks like. This is attached, as you'll see. That's just a hot wire and a ground wire, and that just powers the LED. So this is backlit. If you wanted to change the LEDs, you could come down to this level and start pulling this apart and change your LEDs there, or you just paint that part of the card. Of course, it may be easier, but let's just go ahead and disconnect that from the board. Ideally, you don't pull on the cables, but I don't know if I'm going to have a better way of doing this without a more precision instrument than I've got on the table right now. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and pull on the cables. I would advise against that, but we're gonna do that for this video. Next part looks like a couple screws for the far right side of the shroud, or far left from my perspective. These are Phillips screws, and that's not a big enough screwdriver, so I don't want to strip them. Is this gonna work? Okay, so we've built a new screwdriver to take this out. That looks better. Cool. I'm going to magnetize this like I showed you earlier. Okay, there we go. There's the second screw. I'm going to put these on the mats. These go inside the fan more or less. What's next? Oh, there's that. So we just by accident figured out how to pull this off. That is different than the old one. The old one I think was adhered to it. So there's the little tab, and that tiny tab just sockets in right here. And then there's 3 of them, and you apply downward pressure to get it in there. So that's how that comes off. As you'll see, we had a casualty earlier on the $700 video card. Luckily not a functional part. So if you pull those off, make sure you do it right. Unsocket this one as well, what's left of it anyway. Alright, so that just pulls up and out. Crazy glue it later. So it looks like I'm going to have to take off the back plate to get to whatever screws are holding down the remainder of this cooler. This might be too big. No, it works. Nice. These things, I guarantee you one of these things will get lost. These are actually, they've got thread locker on this. It's got blue thread lock on it. So I guess if you wanted to rebuild it factory for any reason, if you're taking one apart, make sure you put thread lock on there, because that's something they'd notice. Oh, found it. We're good. This is basically exactly why you magnetize a screwdriver, by the way. So here's our last screw, I think, for the right side of the back plate. Oh, that's easy. That just slides right off, so you kind of pressure there and pull that up. There's the underside, very shiny. No real thermal properties there. I'm sure it does something, but I don't know if it's good or bad or noticeable. What do we have here? What are these screws? Looks like a very tiny Allen key. So for lack of better tools, we tried a couple things here. Tried hex drivers to get these out, but I don't have any that are small enough. I don't know if I have a head of any kind that can get in there. I don't know if it's even something that exists, but it looks like we can maybe try some needle nose pliers for lack of something closer. Is that spinning? Looks like that's spinning. Yes, that is spinning. So we've got the world's worst solution to taking these out. You probably shouldn't do it this way. I'm sure there's a more precision tool, but then I'd have to walk to go get it. Cool. So there we go. That's the first one. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 of these that hold on the base of the card here. So these are underside. I hope a bunch of people comment about how they're cringing. Nice. There's several more. God, this sucks. What about this? Oh my God. I've made a discovery. Holy crap, that's so much easier. Come out. Well, it was good while it lasted. I'm gonna use one of these. How did I get... So in the excitement of discovering that this screwdriver had come out and create a much better tool for the job, hex driver with the appropriate size, one of the screws got sucked in there. Come on, man. I know that this unscrews. Is it all the same container, maybe? Ooh, I think it is. What? There's like 3 more in there. What's in there? Can you see with your light? No, really? Well, let's see if we can get the rest out. Let's get this part done and figure that out after. So now, only one can get stuck in there, because there's already one in theory. So now what's holding it in? Got 'em. So now it looks like getting to the end of this. Not all these screws are relevant. I believe it might only be this one and maybe one other back plate screw. That one certainly is, because it's connected right to that black shroud. Okay, that might be it. There's your I/O, which we could already see, but that will allow us to pull and separate the rest of it once we figure out what's still holding it on. Got this out, had to use the hex driver for 2 of the screws, and now I think we can finally separate the card. That's a lot of thermal pads, so I'm gonna be careful here. That's what we've got, it looks like, for the GTX 1080 proper. There's what it looks like. I'm gonna leave that. Oh, we can actually disconnect that really easily. So lots of thermal pads. Those are adhered to, it looks like, the memory and the VRM, and that heatsink on the right side was actually over here, but the VRM and some of the memory is all that stuff's over in this area. So we got, I believe that's our memory chips the GDDR5X. But that's our memory, that's our GPU. We've got some other stuff going on here. VRM setup, power header with the pin out over here connected to the board. And that pretty much wraps up the 1080. That's it. So that's cool. So that is it for the GTX 1080 and GP104. This is not Big Pascal, that's GP100, but it is the first Pascal chip for the consumer audience on the gaming side from the GeForce division of NVIDIA. Really no point to this other than, hey, this is what it looks like. So that's the teardown process. Now, almost none of this last half, the painful half of the process was necessary to apply the liquid cooler that we're going to throw on there. To do that, we actually could have stopped when it was at this stage. This is a 980 Ti. You could stop at this stage, and this doesn't have all the stupid, annoying hex screws on the back. But and then you apply the cold plate, the block right here where you would apply the heatsink, the alloy heatsink normally. So that's it. That's what I got for you. Check back for the liquid cooled version with our overclocking results. We're going to see if it can sustain a higher clock without the same thermal throttling issues that we experienced with the stock cooler for the 1080. As always, links in the description below for more information. Patreon link in the post video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.